All right, sorry about that. So just let's sort of review where we are. So we're going through class by class. We're in the eukarya domain, animal kingdom, chordate phylum, and now we've gone through classes of fish. Amphibians is where we are right now, and then we'll be moving on to reptiles today. So let's finish up. We did. Did you finish the whole slide? Yeah. Oh, okay. I thought you guys were behind me.
No.
So.
Reptile dash.
All right. Okay. All right. So I guess we're on reptiles. So if we think about evolution, the first vertebrates on Earth were fish. And then vertebrates evolved through different pathways. One group of fish sort of broke off and evolved into amphibians. So what's different about fish versus amphibians? Jordan?
Like fish, they have to stay in water at all times or die. But amphibians, they can come out of the water and survive a little bit more longer.
Yeah.
Or a lot longer than fish, and they have thicker skin.
Yeah, exactly. So the shift from fish to amphibians, the evolution of fish into amphibians, allowed animals to start to go onto land for much longer, but they were still tied to the water. Why are amphibians still tied to the water? For what purpose? Jenna? Yeah, but they can live like a lot of their life on land. But there's one important part in which they need to return to water. Yeah, to lay eggs. Because amphibians have external fertilization, female releases eggs into the water, the male releases sperm into the water, sperm cells swim to the eggs to fertilize them. But they require the water for that to happen. The eggs develop and grow and hatch in the water because they're in that jelly-like coat that's not waterproof. So amphibians always need to return to the water for reproduction. The evolution of a group of amphibians into reptiles sort of extended that. Took this ability to stay out away from the water for most of the time and extended it much longer. Reptiles can live their entire lives on dry land, okay, without having to return to the water for reproduction. And we'll talk about why they're able to do that. What are some of the adaptations that allow reptiles to live their entire life on land versus amphibians, which cannot do that? So what are examples? Sometimes people get a little bit confused in terms of what's a reptile, what's an amphibian. So amphibians, we have frogs, toads, salamanders. What are some reptiles? Angela? Snakes, lizards, turtles. Another kind of big group. Eva?
Well, actually,
Crocodiles, alligators. Okay. So those are examples of reptiles.
it's not working.
And because reptiles are able to live their entire lives out of the water, one adaptation that allows them to do that is a body covered in scales. Okay, so reptiles, rather than a body covered in just thin skin like amphibians, reptiles' bodies are covered with these scales. And the scales are dry. If you ever held a snake or a lizard, you may know that their scales are dry, they're not slimy at all. And these scales help prevent them from losing water. It's sort of a waterproof layer so that they don't dehydrate and dry out when they're not in the water. Some reptiles can change the color of their scales. Things like a chameleon, for example, can alter the color of those scales for camouflage or to reflect certain behaviors. You can see in this picture we have the scales that you can see, individual scales. Body temperature. So if you think about if you've ever had any experience with reptiles or if you had a pet reptile, you probably could answer this question. Are reptiles cold-blooded or warm-blooded? Brianna?
Cold-blooded?
They're cold-blooded, just like amphibians. You know, if you have a, does anyone have a pet reptile? Yeah, Jordan? Wouldn't you have something in a cage that provides heat?
Yeah.
What is it?
Bitter dragon.
Okay. So do you have like a mat or a rock or a lamp? Okay. So if you have a pet reptile, if you go visit reptiles at a zoo, you'll notice that they usually have a heat source in their cage with them because they can't generate their own body heat. Like all cold-blooded organisms, their body temperature depends on their surroundings. And so if their surroundings are cold, their body temperature is going to be low and they're not going to be active. If you provide them with a source of heat, their body temperature is higher and they can be more active. Now, because they can't regulate their body temperature internally, many reptiles have certain behaviors, however, that allow them to sort of regulate it. You know, if you've ever been someplace like Florida, where there's lots of those little anole lizards, or South Carolina, in the morning, where do you find those lizards?
Like either crawling on like brick walls or something.
Yeah, sometimes like holding onto a wall, on a sidewalk, on a screened-in patio. They'll go there in the morning, and basically it's called basking. Just basically stay in the sun, absorbing heat from the sun, allowing their body temperature to rise so they can start to become more active. If they get too hot, they'll go in the shade, they'll go in the water to help cool their body temperature down. So they can't regulate it internally, but because of their behavior, they can regulate it somewhat. So reptiles are cold-blooded. Body temperature depends on their surroundings. Now, this is important because this is a major reason why reptiles can start to live permanently on land. Amphibians had what kind of fertilization? Where did it take? External, in the water, right? The frog or salamander lays eggs in the water. The male releases sperm cells into the water. The sperm cells swim, fertilize the eggs, and then they can develop. Well, reproducing on land presents some problems. Because now, how are those sperm cells going to reach the egg cells if they can't swim there? And so reptiles were the first group of vertebrates that evolved to have internal fertilization. What that means is the male deposits sperm cells internally, inside of the female. And inside of the female, those sperm cells can swim to the egg cells, fertilize them. And then typically what happens once those egg cells are fertilized by a sperm cell, and what usually happens with reptiles? What's the next step? Jordan?
Either some will hatch and then they'll continue on their life without their parents next one.
Right, but first what happens? Right? Yeah, after the egg's fertilized, then the female lays the egg, in a nest in the sand somewhere. And then the young finish up their development inside of the egg. And so that allows reptiles to reproduce on land. Basically, inside of that egg, you have a little watery environment, self-contained inside the egg, rather than reproducing in the water. So the shell of a reptile egg is this sort of, it's not like a chicken egg that you might imagine from the store. It's not brittle and hard. It's more flexible. It's often thought of as like a leathery egg. Has anyone ever found like turtle eggs or something, the shells left over, like if you're hiking around, you sometimes see them in the springtime. And they're like flexible. You could like pick them up. They're not going to break up. And that's to help make sure that they're waterproof, because you need a waterproof little environment for the young to develop inside of. So reptiles generally lay their eggs on land. Like I said, sometimes just on the ground, sometimes in a nest, Sometimes they're buried in the sand. Just depends on the individual animal. Inside of that egg, the young are developing and growing until they're ready to hatch. Okay? So we call that external development. So internal fertilization, sperm meets the egg inside of the female, but then the young develop outside of the body in the egg. Now there are a couple snakes especially that hold the fertilized eggs in their body and the young hatch in their body and then come out live. But that's not the usual. Usually the eggs are laid on land. As far as circulation, and someone mentioned this earlier, the heart of a reptile is different than the heart of an amphibian, but it's not quite a 4-chambered heart like birds and mammals. They have what we call a 3 1/2 chambered heart. And so this is a diagram kind of showing it. So what you have in a reptile heart are you have 2 chambers, 2 atrium. Blood comes into those 2 chambers, gets pumped down. This is the ventricle, the pumping chamber. And in reptiles, it has this like wall that like separates it partially. It doesn't fully separate it. If it did, that would be a 4-chambered heart. So it kind of separates it. What this means is blood, okay, from the various parts of the body could come in, okay, get pumped into this ventricle and then pumped out to head to the lungs. Okay. Versus the other side, blood from the lungs could come in and get pumped out to the body. Now there is a little bit of mixing of the blood here, but the blood is kept much more separated between oxygen-rich blood and oxygen-poor blood. And that's more efficient at getting oxygen to all the cells in the body. We're going to talk a little bit in more detail about snakes tomorrow. But snakes are interesting because they have a lot of adaptations. To have that unique elongated body, they have lots of adaptations where their organs have been sort of shaped differently than other organisms. They're offset. Sometimes only one of their paired organs is fully developed to allow them to have that shape that allows all of the organs to fit in to their body.